But it's a real pleasure to be joined on the stage with 4 people who, over the time, you won't tell, but we've actually practiced this. But during that process, I've come to sort of appreciate, from a farming point of view, just how complex it is. And and I think John and I like to think what we're doing is complex, but I have certainly learned a lot from the 3 of you in just how complex. And I've learned a lot from John as well, to be honest. But for instance, I didn't even know that you could graze sheep on wheat. So we're going to be we're going to be talking about that. So how this is going to work, we're going to talk about soil systems and the philosophy of why, or perhaps what even a regen ag philosophy is. But through there, we're going to lace in scientific evidence for what's going on in the soil as a consequence of the way that James, Ed, and John are managing their systems. So hopefully you will see both sides of the story. And there's also the other thread is about how we can use maize more effectively in our rotations. And I think that's really important for farmers locally about such an important crop. So what I want to do is ask Ed and James, first of all, to introduce their farms. One of you's got to go first. And just give people an idea of what you're doing and why you're doing it, please. Now, if you want. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Real privilege to be here this afternoon. I'm the Devon representative on the committee up here. Yeah, it's fantastic to be here. We're based at Crediton in mid-Devon on the lovely Devon red soil, bottom left-hand picture. And that's what it's all about, is our soil. And why I'm on my journey to why I'm here today, I suppose it started 20 years ago when I had a gap year in New Zealand and I saw a direct drill working for the first time. And I thought, wow, I wonder if that's a solution to our soil erosion issues on our hills. So yeah, for the next 10 or so years, I studied the process. And yeah, that's our basis of our system. And over the last 20 years, we've come to appreciate the opportunities, not just direct drilling as a system, but the biological processes of the soil and how that can reduce our costs. So yeah, it's great to have the backing of our family and especially my father, who doesn't think I'm a complete nutter, not wanting to plough. But it's been a great 20 years.
Well, thank you very much. On the polar opposite front of James, I'm the left-hand side. We have no soil. Soil erosion is something I'd quite like. It would mean that I had enough to run down a hill. Instead, our farming system is designed to be low input and low risk because we are low yielding. We're perched at nearly 1,000 feet on top of the Cotswold Hills on about 6 inches of limestone-based brash laid over permeable rock. We don't hold water. We miss a lot of rain. We sit above the clouds a lot of the time. So our system is designed predominantly now to remove outside risk and to increase soil health, soil structure and soil porosity to try and hold much more water, or hold any water, let's be honest. 3 days of water holding capacity makes a hell of a difference when it comes to a crop of wheat in June when you put it through a combine. So we've redesigned our farming system to remove external inputs, to integrate what we have at our fingertips, which is a lot of livestock as well. And as Andy has mentioned, I was extolling the virtues of sheep grazing wheat to him last night. I'm like a broken record occasionally, and there will be something about that later. So yeah, looking at integration, risk reduction in a more challenging environment.
Thank you. And I think none of us really need to talk about why we're trying to avoid this, but this is what you're trying to avoid with your philosophies, right? All 3 of you. So cricket ball-sized lumps of soil that are more like house bricks.
That's a Devon red lump.
It's a Devon red lump, okay. So I want to move on to what we want to discuss. And I suppose part of this, we had a very interesting discussion about what each of you, as 3 farmers, think regenerative agriculture is. Ed doesn't like the term. So can we have a bit of to and fro, really, about what your perspective is of the term or the philosophy? And I think perhaps John should start, because I suppose you had the philosophy first of all of us on this stage.
Well, yeah, sorry. We farm in Hertfordshire, for those who don't know, and I'm not very good at taking snaps, so I'm afraid there's no slides to go with our farm. But it's we've been yeah, we went no-till 12 years ago or so, and that was very exciting. We're a bit behind James on the learning how to do things, and became sort of slightly obsessed about our soil almost instantly, and it realised just how we had been abusing it and not looking after it. And we followed the idea of conservation agriculture, which has, I think, three main principles, which are minimal disturbance of the soil and keeping the soil covered and introducing diversity. Diversity is the answer to almost any question you'd like to ask. But, and, you know, that worked quite well. But then it's a kind of technical difference. What's conservation agriculture, what's regenerative agriculture? And it's regen's been bandied about an awful lot, but I got very excited about the idea of regenerating things. Well, I was lucky enough to bump into a farmer called Gabe Brown in America, who, you know, I was sort of wittering on about trying to find a sustainable system, and he said, well, what the hell's the point of sustaining something which is fundamentally degraded? You know, your soils are degraded. Why sustain them at that level? You know, you need to regenerate your soils. And you know, it's like he hit me across the face with a large haddock. You know, I sort of, you know, sort of smiled and backed away, and then several years later, it finally sort of sunk in. You know what he was on about. And so, and regenerative agriculture, the Americans are way ahead of us because they degraded their stuff far worse than we have, and it's with the Dust Bowl and everything. The prairies were fantastic, and they've all gone. But yeah, so it's basically conservation agriculture with bells on, and it's and these guys are quite important. You know, to reintroduce animals into the arable rotation, and keeping living roots in the ground at all times, because as we heard this morning, plants are sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and pumping a surprising amount of it into the soil, and that's kind of really, really boosts your soil and makes life an awful lot better. But you know, it's not, regenerative agriculture for me is not just a sort of fancy term, but it's a direction of travel. You know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, once you've seen the light, you change what you're doing and move in a different direction towards trying to make things better. And I think that's kind of all you need to think. And you know, there's a lot of people itching to turn it into a whole lot of things you can tick off on a clipboard, so you can charge more for your produce. But you know, you or me as a farmer, I just want to make my farm better. I want to be producing better food. And I don't, you know, it's very nice if someone wants to pay me extra for it, but I'm also doing it to make more money. You know, it's a much cheaper system, and it's I haven't made a very clear story, but it's
You have, but I want to put Ed. I know, Ed, you subscribe to all of that, but you just don't like the term, and I'd just like to. I think what I would like to show is that actually there's whatever we call it. Fundamentally, there's the same philosophy driving through it, and we shouldn't get hung up on the term. So what do you dislike about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I subscribe to all of the same principles. We have the same end goal. We come at it from maybe a slightly different angle. But the reason I don't like the word regen is that it can mean anything to anyone, which is in some respects is wonderful. It's great. You can apply it to many different things. The other respect, because it can be so readily applied to anything, is that it's actually lost its core meaning. I call our system a hybrid system because it is, for want of a better word, shoehorning any good idea I can find into one amalgamation. It's not, we farm by the same principles, but that's why John and I have to be separated at this point, I still have a large plough. We're not allowed to sit next to each other because
we'll come back to that later, won't we?
He will hit me.
Right,
but even though we adhere to the same principles, we go about it in different ways, and therefore I think labeling yourself as one thing can lead you down a road of being restrictive with how you are. So suddenly you do one thing and you can't be regenerative if you plough something, or if you don't involve livestock, suddenly you can't be regenerative. So that's sort of my dislike of the term. Like I said, we're both heading in the same direction, just from a slightly different perspective.
So let's take a look at how you're doing this in the field then. So I think we have a little movie here. So can you speak as the pet? Walk us through.
This is direct drilling some malting barley last spring. Thankfully there's no sound, because all you can hear is the sound of stones hitting discs on our soil. So we have taken the view, we are predominantly direct drill, but like John, so moving as little soil as possible. We have very little soil to move, and it's relatively easy to cultivate, so why on earth are we bothering to spend a lot of diesel, time and effort turning it over, making it brown, releasing carbon? So we are a direct drill system where we are now 8 years in, but when I say we're a direct drill system, we also occasionally, if conditions or circumstances dictate, we will use min-till, shallow min-till, to fix a surface compaction problem behind a lot of livestock, or we will plough when we have made a mess of something and we need to press the reset button. And so that is our sort of our system of direct drilling. We also focus on very much lowering inputs, which leads to James's system, which is slightly different to ours.
Yes, and regenerative farming for me is, I think Tom mentioned it this morning, it's sort of knocking in the face a little bit of what our forefathers did before. They didn't come up with the farm policy, they farmed to the restrictions and standards as they thought. But looking forwards, I think regenerative farming is tweaking around the edges and just having a play with things. And luckily in the southwest, we've got loads of resources at our fingertips, livestock farming, cattle manures, to really boost our soils. And it's just working out those systems to get the best results. Could we just whip back one? That's our cattle in the Exe Valley, and that's 3 miles from Exeter City Centre. And I just want to invite, if there's anyone from Exeter City Council here that wants to come out and see up-to-date, positive farming on your doorstep, those cattle have actually, they came in a short time in the finishing shed and are now finished. So yeah, regenerative farming can be healthy, profitable meat farming, as well as pasture-based and vegetable production.
Thank you. So did you want to say anything about your strip tilling, or do you want to?
How long have you got?
Well,
my little regen project has been strip tilling maize. On the back of our direct drilling cereals into grass and a wide rotation, we were falling short on maize, and that was a sort of a step backwards. So yeah, after the last 10 years, we've been developing a strip till maize system that we should talk about later on.
yeah, and you're both doing inter-row drilling,
Yeah.
right? So that's something you've both incorporated into your system. Why that?
Yeah, so for us, these actually 4 pictures are from actually right outside my house. It's quite handy. The top 2 is a crop of winter barley inter-row drilled into a spring barley stubble in mid-December and I think the beginning of April last year. And then the bottom 2 is a cover crop and a crop of oilseed rape being established into row. The reason for inter-row drilling, we found, especially on our soil type, is always goes back for us is moisture conservation, and it's not just keeping living roots in the ground; it's keeping root structures in the ground. So, not only do we always try and keep a living root and keep the ground covered, keeping ground covered doesn't have to always be a living object. We are still protecting that bottom left-hand picture is a cover crop, I think, emerging, and the bottom right is a crop of oilseed rape. They're still the stubble is still protecting the soil across the surface, so it's slowing down transpiration rates of sunlight hitting bare soil. And we also still have the active root system of that stubble in place. So that is a crop of rape established this summer, which is quite amazing. That was put in July. It didn't rain for, as we all know, for a very long time. Yeah, we managed to utilize the roots of the standing stubble to help infiltrate any water we do get, runs into the soil faster. We don't get as much runoff, and therefore we can utilize water more efficiently.
And it's a sort of a natural progression, a natural step of something else you want to try once you start direct drilling. You want to try the next thing. You may have seen it online or something. You think, oh, I'll have a go at that. It's excellent for your Twitter and Instagram likes. They all go mad for it. Looks really smart. But we've reduced our glyphosate use because you hoe out, say, the volunteer barley in a crop of oilseed rape, and it camouflages the oilseed rape from the flea beetle, which is another great benefit.
So Ed, this is a video you supplied again of into hoeing in practice. Can you just tell us, you've got some fancy cameras here. Could you tell us what's going on?
Yeah, so as I said before, not only are we looking at minimal disturbance from a soil health perspective, we also look at lowering inputs from a commercial point of view. At the end of the day, I run a business. We have to churn a profit at the other end, otherwise what's the point in me doing it? And part of that is reducing our external input bill. So instead of now blindly, I am an agronomist by trade as well for my sins. Now, rather than blindly applying pre-em to every single hectare of crop that we plant, we now have not used a pre-em in 3 years. We have not used post-emergence herbicide in 7 out of 18 different combinable crops that we grow. Full stop. We now use inter-row hoes, so camera-guided, targeted surface cultivations. So bottom right-hand picture can show the size of a blackgrass plant. It can weed out in a crop of wheat. So we have the center picture shows it's a 3D camera array that stares at 3 rows underneath it and associates every foot on 25 centimeter row spacings to inter-row hoe. So not only have we reduced our chemical bill drastically, we're now down to basically 30% input cost of where we were. Still producing, I hasten to add, exactly the same yields as we were before. Regen or low input or hybrid, whatever you want to call it, does not always mean producing less. I still actually produce exactly the same as my neighbours, and actually because we add sheep into the mix, which we'll see in a minute, I actually produce more calories per hectare than my neighbours do in a year. But we're also not applying herbicides to soil. Soil-acting herbicides have may have an adverse effect on soil health, and also very much have an adverse effect on water quality. We all spend our lives being told that water companies are finding propyzamide, carbetamide, any form of molluscicide in water. We will have these products removed if we don't use them properly. It's what we've been told for years. We still don't use them properly. I've taken the step to mitigate their removal already by the fact that we farm now without them. So not only are we helping protect soil, we're protecting my farm bank account and our local watercourses.
Do you have anything to say, James? You don't have to say anything.
No, we're talking about new technology, and it's using the tools in our toolbox to push the envelope of what we're trying to do.
Right. So John, we've seen a lot of systems that are trying to minimize the disturbance of soil. What can you tell us about what's going on under the soil as a consequence of this?
So, like I say, I'm talking to other people's work, so the credit is theirs, not mine. To sort of understand the consequences of tillage, you have to think like a microbe. And there's some sort of, what do you call these, sort of simple diagrams of the consequences. Basically, when you cultivate soil, you break up the fabric of soil into these aggregates. I've studied soil for 35 years and never really seen an aggregate unless you do tillage or you pick up some soil and break it. Soil itself, if you dig a hole and you look at it, you don't see aggregates, you see a continuum, a bit more like on the right-hand side, where the continuity of the matrix is still there, and the roots and the biopores remain intact and connected. And this connectivity things are really important. And Andy mentioned it previously. 2 things: the connectivity is really important. Secondly, that soil is an adaptive system. It's all the time adapting to the prevailing conditions, largely how much energy is flowing into the soil in the form of organic matter.
So let's look at the structures under tilled and non-tilled systems here. Why can't I get this? Oh, sorry. I can't get these to work. Oh, jeez. You notice mine worked much better. Okay, so we've got a zero-till soil here, John.
Yeah, so what you'll see there
we
is the very intact root channels that are still there. The ploughed soil, on the other hand, looks to be full of space. So the red stuff there is pore space. Now the critical thing is, what is the scale at which these images are being made? And Andy made the point that the stuff that he and I do focuses on really quite small pores, smaller than a hair's width, which hold on to water against gravity. It's responsible for storing water in soil and then connecting that to roots. These channels tend to be the ones that are responsible for drainage, so the water moves through those channels. So in the ploughed soil, if you like, the infiltration can be higher, and the oxygen can penetrate deeper into the profile compared to the zero-till. And all of that is important for maintaining energy in the form of carbon in the soil system. And I think the next slide. So here's an example of comparing. There's quite a lot of stuff on this diagram, but I'll try and just quickly remember what the hell is there. On the top left-hand graph there is a comparison. So the different colored bars, the dark color is subsurface, the light gray one is the surface soil, and the take home there on the surface, there's an effect of different tillages. So zero-till tends to have a lower porosity than the tilled. Now, this is the more macro porosity contribution to the pore space. Next slide. Now, the other piece of this is the connectivity. So this graph here on the left-hand side shows conventional tilled, 1 in 5 years of zero-till, 6 to 10 years of zero-till, and then 11 to 15 of zero-till. The yellow spot is the total porosity, and the orange or red square is the connected porosity. So what you can see is conventional tilled has a lot more of this macro porosity. It's a high porosity, but it's not very connected. Zero-till, after 1 to 5 years, there's not a heck of a difference. But as you progress and persist with zero-till over time, you see the connected porosity starts to significantly increase. Now that connected porosity is what Andy talked about. That's the stuff that holds on to water and connects that stored water to your plant roots. Now, the significance for carbon is in these diagrams. So what is called global warming potential is just respiration rate, how much carbon is leaving the system because the microbes are eating it and respiring it in the form of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere again. On the left-hand diagram, you can see that there's a lower respiration in the zero-tilled than the conventionally tilled. And you might think, well, that's not great because you want microbes to be doing a lot. But if microbes are doing a lot, they're losing a lot of carbon. So the carbon flux out of the zero-tilled soil is lower. And bottom line is, the only difference between these soils is one is tilled and the other isn't. And the bottom line is the reason why there's more carbon in zero-tilled soil is because it doesn't respire off so quickly. And the reason it doesn't respire off so quickly is because it's been allowed to be in its natural state, where it adapts according to how much carbon is flowing into the system. It adapts in a way that maintains a store of energy in the soil, ready for when the opportunity arises, when a whole bunch of new carbon comes in, perhaps in the next season, in the next growing season, that the soil is then ready to quickly get back into action again to exploit that new flow of nutrients. It's a little bit like when your mobile phone starts to run out of battery. It switches off a whole bunch of of functions, so it can conserve some energy, so it's still ready to fire up the next time you need to use it. Soil does that too. You can think of carbon in soil like a battery that is provides the power to function the physical and biological processes that we need to happen in soil. And the right-hand diagram just shows the same sort of thing, but over time, where the difference between the zero-tilled and the conventional tilled is such that after 11 years, there's a massive difference in the amount of carbon that leaves the system. All the time, because when you're tilling the soil, you're breaking up the structure, letting the oxygen in, and that's enabling the microbes to burn carbon faster. Whereas if you just left soil to be the way that it evolved to be, it burns off the carbon more slowly and keeps it in the soil.
I don't think we need that. I don't think we need that either. So, thank you, John. Now, the min-till is really only part of your systems, right? All three of you are keen on using cover crops, and there are some very interesting practical issues to do with cover crops. So, first of all, why do you use them? The three, John as well. And secondly, how do you move from one cover crop to a cash crop, and what are the options there and the pros and cons of them? James, you could go first.
I'll sort of focus on the maize part of farming then. For me, I think cover crops give a massive opportunity to cover the soil for what could be 8 months a year when there's nothing covering the soil, from say an August harvest of winter barley right round to the next May. That soil is not doing anything. It's not trapping sunlight. The microbes aren't being fed, and it's just a massive opportunity to either fix nitrogen or hold nutrients in the soil and then make them available for that maize crop. We've done some trials with oats and field beans cover mix, quite a simple mix that we could find seed on the farm, and we got 30 kilos of nitrogen in the soil. So times £1.90 or £1.80 that it could be today, that definitely paid for itself. It fed sheep over the winter. Nice thing it was they fed on the oats, left the beans right until the last minute, and they were just conditioning and feeding those soil microbes. And then we've got, that's the bean root there in the fourth picture. Just that massive root structure holding soil over our freak weather events we could get over the winter. So for me, it's in front of maize is a massive opportunity to grow a cover crop.
Ed?
So cover crops are a key part of many regen or hybrid or min-till systems for the fact that they can do an awful lot of your cultivations for you. And it ticks a lot of the boxes for keeping soil covered, keeping active roots in a soil. Even a short gap, not on the space of an August harvest to a next May planting. I will put a cover crop in anywhere that I can. So if we've got a 6-week window, I will put something in the ground. And you know what? Sometimes you have to put something in the ground. A dodgy combine operator can be your best drillman you've ever seen, as we all know that spring barley volunteers are the quickest growing crop to mankind. It grows, it covers the ground, it puts a root in the ground, it sucks up excess nitrogen, it sucks up, absorbs sunlight and pumps carbon into the soil, and if you put sheep over it, it's fed something, and it's cost you absolutely nothing, bar the fact it should have been in a shed and not left in a field. But cover crop mixtures also can do your cultivation work. So if you choose the correct varieties within your mix, depending on what you're after, whether you're after feeding sheep for 8 weeks before you put in another cash crop, then obviously you would choose a mix that grows a lot of biomass above ground quickly. Mustard, buckwheat, cheap, easy, fast, sheep eat it, done, out the way. If we have things going in for longer term and we're looking at soil structuring underground and looking at creating drainage channels over winter to allow water into ground and help with that interconnectivity of porosity, then we'll grow something with longer tap roots that will still be in place in the ground for longer periods of time. And then is looking at what comes after a cover crop is always the next challenge as to how we have to manage it, whether we have to graze it to get rid of it to put a crop in, or whether actually we can get away with a cover crop that we can direct drill straight into. So for instance, a straight clover mix of berseem and crimson clover, we can drag a drill through that quite happily, turf some sheep on it the day after we've drilled it, use them to roll it in, and they'll graze the clover back to allow a cereal to appear. Obviously, I would never put a brassica cover in front of drilling oilseed rape, so you always have to choose the right tool for the right aim, or know what your aim is to choose the right tool to fulfill it for you.
John, what's your experience of cover cropping?
Mixed, really. No, but I love them. I mean, they're wonderful things, and it's a. Last year, we had the drill all fired up, ready to go, and I don't know about what it's like down here, but it didn't rain for about 6 months, it seemed. So we didn't actually plant any. But it's a. Well, not very early anyway. They are fantastic for all the reasons people say, and as Ed said, a sloppy combine driver can be your best friend. Was it you, James? Anyway, it was, but and interestingly, reading back, if you like the old farming books, which are just completely fascinating, because none of this stuff is new, and organic farmers in the audience, and I was wondering why the hell we're talking about cover crops as if it's something new. It's like Newman Turner, talking about. The same thing, and he wouldn't buy the seed either. He'd rely on what was in the ground and just sort of scuff the thing up a bit and let the plants go. And it's that. I hate seeing bare ground. Driving down here from Hertfordshire yesterday, it pained me how much bare ground there was, and it shouldn't. You're wasting all that solar energy that's beating down on the ground, and this green stuff is harvesting that energy and putting it into your soil. And saving valuable nutrients from being washed away, locking it up in the plant, and releasing it for your spring crops. It's kind of crazy not to use that free energy. And it's we're talking about all the pores and all the rest of it earlier. The microbes and the fungi in the soil which you're feeding, which the plant roots are feeding, they create that fantastic underground world that creates this wonderful sponge that we're trying to turn our soils into. And cover crops are just a vital way of doing that, and using land when it wouldn't otherwise be being used because of whatever rotation you're growing. Fantastic things, cover crops, yeah.
And I'm ashamed to say I thought this drilling on the green phrase was a new term, and James put me in my place and told me, no, it's done a lot on time. So could you talk us through the drilling on the green concept?
In the cereal drilling context, it's a strategy to get around slug pressures. You grow a nice big crop of volunteers, normally oilseed rape, and you drill on the green, so you don't spray the crop off. You drill the wheat through the volunteer rape. You then spray off a day or two later, and while the wheat is establishing and getting away from the slugs are eating the rape, and it's just quite cool to see this wheat crop coming through, and you haven't luckily not applied any slug pellets. There's a few other photos while I'm speaking on the best result of our maize we had this year. It was a first-time grower in Somerset, actually. And yeah, the strip till system is great, but it's a systems approach. To get the best result from it, you've got to look at all options to you. And it was no surprise to me, this was the best crop we helped to establish this year, where he grew a lovely cover crop, including clovers and legumes and radishes and everything else, and got that to graze down. The moisture was held in the soil by the residue then, must use the correct terms, the residue between the rows of maize in the middle there, and then the crop just, took off. And with a calibrated forager, it did 19 tonnes, so that was a pleasing result in quite a tricky year.
And Ed, this is something that you've put into your system as well, I understand.
Absolutely, we will drill straight into green cover crops and use them as almost an inter-row mulch. So if, for instance, this autumn we planted all of our spelt. Yes, I'm growing stuff the Romans did because I'm slightly weird. We used mustard and buckwheat as a post-harvest cover crop behind wheat, drilled spelt straight into it. Mustard was tall enough that as the drill went over it, kinked it, laid it down in between the rows. It acts as a weed smothering mulch in between the rows, and then, I'm not going to lie, in November when the mustard was flowering yellow lying on the floor, I was having a panic attack. It was never going to die, and I'm so vocal about using not very many chemicals that I was having a bit of a sweaty palm moment, and thankfully -12 in the first week of December sorted that out for me, and we're all safe. I don't have a crop of mustard with some spelt struggling underneath it. But we use that as well in maize. The video clip there is showing our interrow hoe also has the ability to undersow, and we undersow our maize with clover so that when the maize comes off, we can travel better. We don't have massive 75 centimetre wide bands of bare soil for trailers to drive on. We have a surface covering of green clover to take the weight of the trailer, but also we then get to drill wheat behind a late harvested crop with something already green and binding the soil surface together, so that if we were to end up with a late maize harvest in mid-November and we were putting wheat in December, I'm not looking at bare soil. I have soil armouring or soil protection already in place, and a perennial crop of white clover is of no concern to a crop of wheat.
So, John, I'm going to turn to you. What is the impact of having cover crops on soils doing for soil structure? You remember this slide, right?
I do remember this slide,
Yeah.
because I think I'm on the paper. So, this is, remember I mentioned there are kind of two different scales, the scale of pores that hold on to water and the scales of pores that let water fall through. This is the stuff, the sponge. This is the stuff that holds on to water. So very, very small pieces of soil imaged at high resolution, and the volume and connectivity of that pore space determines how much water it can store and how fast that water can move towards plant roots. 3 treatments, 1 fallow. So this is, you'd never do this to soil unless you really hated it. So 58 years of nothing growing in it, hoed every spring to even the weeds have gone. Then arable and grassland. So arable's ploughed in this case, continuous wheat, and grass, which isn't ploughed and just left to be grass. And the porosity on the right-hand side there, for the fallow, is 15% compared with the grass, which is almost twice as much. So twice as much volume in that sponge to hold on to water. And what we also know is that that's also pretty much all interconnected. So all of that volume is available to the plant. Arable is pretty much in the middle there, partly because it's been ploughed so much, but partly also because of the difference in the inputs from the arable versus the grass.
So you're seeing the combined effects there of permanent cover and also minimum disturbance of the soil at the same time.
Yeah.
Gives you that extra porosity and water holding capacity.
Yep.
Thank you. And so here we've got some examples of different rooting traits of cover crops.
Yeah, so if I remember my homework from last night, reading about this slide. So this is comparing tillage radish on the left, vetch in the middle, black oat on the right-hand side, and these are, again, high-resolution, CT images of columns of soil with these roots growing in it. Day 20 on the top row, same species day 58 on the bottom row, and the red arrow indicates where there's a plough pan, so a hard, sort of dense layer of soil that, depending on the plant, you get a very different response. So in the case of the tillage radish, it doesn't really like that hard pan, and it can't penetrate very effectively, whereas the black oat just steams on through as if it's not there. So a very different response from depending on the species that you're using. And coming back to the point about what are you trying to achieve with your cover crop, if you're going to design a good cover crop, you need to know what you want it to do and choose the species accordingly. There's enough known to help you select the species to do the bioengineering or whatever it is that you want to do with your system. On the right-hand side is just an indication, a slightly different piece of information on the effect of cover crops on this porosity again, with this time comparing the effect of soil compaction. Compaction, something that I don't think we've covered too much in the day so far, but I'm completely obsessed with this porosity and the connectedness of it, and compaction is one of those things that really screws the soil up, which is why it's so easy to make a path on grass. If you just keep walking over it a few times, eventually the soil loses this capacity to store water and to support plants because it's compacted. You can uncompact or rather you can help uncompact with cover crops, and this is just the effect of different mixtures, cover crop mixtures, I think it is, on the porosity of the soil. The take-home message here is if you've already got a very compacted soil, it's hard to recover that compared with a less compacted soil. So the message is don't wait to act on compaction, because the longer you wait, the harder it is to recover that porosity and the connectedness of that porosity using cover crops.
Thank you. So now we get to the thing I didn't know existed. Oh, an illicit wheat. I thought that was funny as well, and then realised that's actually a variety.
So as has been mentioned already during this, none of what we are doing or talking about is actually anything particularly new when it comes to practical farming. This is a scene, minus the fact that there's a half-decent coloured combine. That'll make most of you angry. In there, this is a scene that my grandfather and great-grandfather would have thought was perfectly normal. Actually, the same with an inter-row hoe. All I've done is replace the person on a seat staring between their feet, who might get sidetracked by the thought of their lunch or what they forgot to turn off the oven this morning, with a 3D camera that decides to work at the same efficiency every day. So livestock integration is vital in our system, not only from a soil health point of view, but I would always go back to the fact that it makes us more money. So a crop of Group 3 biscuit wheat. This actually ends up with McVitie's, going to make chocolate digestives, so all good things come to those who wait eventually. But this is currently, I've seen reference of what is exactly happening at home at the moment. I think we have 6,500 head of lambs, sheep in total at the moment on nothing but cereal crops. I don't have a single sheep on grass at the moment. They are all standing in arable fields, merrily grazing away, and as you can see, we still can cut it, perfectly normal timing. A lot of people go, oh good lord, you've grazed it with sheep, or you'll never combine it in time, it'll be late, it'll be backwards, you'll never yield properly. That is not last year, that was actually the year before, because I don't think we cut any wheat at 16% last year. I'd have been very happy on that basis. But if we go to the next slide, we'll see what it can do for disease control. And if I can have the next one. Yeah. I'll make it more exciting, I promise. I am trying my best. I am trying my best.
That's your third crate of wine, Andy, I think.
Pardon?
That's your third crate of wine you've got to buy.
Right. After that glowing reference. Yay. So, sheep grazing in cereals. Two plants on the right-hand side. So this is a field of winter triticale. We grow this as a seed crop. So as you can see, the bottom picture is taken in February. I had grazed that a little hard. I think we'd forgotten about them for a day. But actually, turns out it's totally fine. Cereal crops will get over anything. As you've probably all seen, rabbits can graze 15 metres out into a field. You know what, when it gets to harvest, you've probably only lost 6 metres. And some of those ears will be the biggest and cleanest you've seen, because actually they have avoided overwinter latent disease infection. So, 2 plants on the right-hand side of the screen. The left-hand plant is from an ungrazed strip in this field. The right-hand plant is taken from where we'd grazed. I still do this. I still will fence off strips to have a control in my own system for me to be able to quantify our benefit every year. But this had 0 fungicide applied to it as a growing crop. As you can see, the left-hand plant, we have 3 ears, 3 tillers per plant, and basically 0 green leaf left on the, I think this is the 15th of June. Yellow rust has run rampant through that crop because it came out of a particularly mild winter with a dose of yellow rust. Without using fungicides and without sheep grazing, we don't control it, we get pretty poor yields. The only difference between those 2 plants is the fact the right-hand plant got grazed. So we removed that overwintered latent infection. Therefore, with 0 fungicide inputs, I have managed to double its output. Not only have I doubled its output in the form of a combinable yield, as I mentioned earlier, we've also fattened, I think it was about 800 in that mob. 800 lambs have spent 12 days in one field. You multiply that across an entire farm, suddenly you look at the calorific output per hectare. Not only actually in this case have I increased our cereal yield from what it could have been, I've churned out a lot of calories in the form of lamb. So when people start to look at regen farming or lower input farming, they can get put off by the idea that lower input must mean lower output. What actually it means is lower input means you look at how your output differs. I now have 2 sets of output on one field rather than just one. I'm not waiting for a harvest in August. I'm already getting money back, as it were, in March when those lambs are fat and go off to slaughter. And conversely, they've also saved me money. I've saved 60, 70 quid a hectare in fungicides. Also, no growth reg. We've managed to manipulate it with sheep quite easily. Cereal plants, like any plant, has a fight or like an animal has a fight or flight resistance mode. It can't pick its roots up and run away. What can it do? Its only viable thing to do when it's under attack is to desperately produce its offspring as fast as it can. Therefore, a grazed plant will always throw out more tillers. It's a natural reaction to being under attack, because all that plant wants to do is produce viable offspring. That's an annual plant's only desire. So we can manipulate that with livestock rather than chemicals. We're all, I think, doing a little bit better.
Thank you. The only reason I drifted off is I had to sit through that last night. When I asked, is that such a thing? So, James, we've talked about Ed's particular interest in grazing sheep on wheat. I know your particular interest is how we can use maize much more effectively in a rotation. So can we take this last slide to just discuss that topic, please?
Thank you. Yes, I think it's a little bit of a case study compared to stubble turnip grazing this morning when, the system may not be quite right, but it's not throwing it all out and forgetting that management process. It's tweaking the edges and seeing where we can go with it. For example, maize is such an important crop to many farmers in the southwest, and it can be argued it's good for soil, being a C4 plant. It's pumping all that root exudates there on the left, all that sticky, lovely soil food into the soil to feed the microbes. Very high output crop, but it has got a bit of a bad reputation for Cheerio soil down the lanes and onto the rivers. So that's been my sort of project then for the last 3 or 4 years to try and come up with a solution for this. And it is not just the piece of kit we're running, but I'm very proud of what we've come up with. But it's the system as a whole, getting the livestock on the ground before to build the soil nutrients. And I really quite like a quote from the Australian Christine Jones. Soil is not short of nutrients; it's short of soil microbial life. So it's just trying to work out how we can tap into all that productivity and nutrition in the soil with the options we've got at hand.
So this whole system that we've been discussing is your approach to using maize much more effectively.
Yeah, in the arable rotation, it's a productive and a profitable crop to us, but we don't want to have that soil degradation that it's attributed to.
Great, thank you. So we had John didn't because he wasn't there, but we had a discussion about summary and can we talk collectively? I know, John, you are particularly insistent that we make a lot of effort in over-medicalizing our soils. Could you just start us off there? And that's something you told me when we very first met.
So Is this working? Yep.
Yeah.
So this is this thing about soil health, and what that was a term that was getting kicked around a lot and wasn't really very well defined. Still isn't very well defined until our next paper comes out. But so I thought when I first started thinking about this not decades ago, probably about 10 years ago, I thought I'll look in the human medical literature, because they'll know what health means, and then I'll start from there and see if I can figure out how we might think about soil health. And basically the medical literature doesn't know how to define health. It knows how to define sickness. And that leads to medicalisation. So we've not got a national health service, we've got a national sickness service that helps you if you get sick. But having said that, there was a global campaign to come up with a better definition of health on the 60th anniversary of the World Health Organization, originally defining it just after the First World War and Second World War. And the winning definition was the capacity to adapt and self-manage. And actually, if you think about soil, the ability of soil to adapt and self-manage is a pretty good measure of whether you've got a healthy soil or not. And of course, the energy that enables it to adapt and self-manage is the flow of carbon through the system and the store that it keeps for use when in need, before the next flux of carbon comes in. So in the same way that if you focus too much on sickness in human health, you medicalize it. If you focus too much on sickness in agriculture, you over-medicalize the soil. Actually, you just need to give it what it needs. A good diet, good lifestyle. Lifestyle in this case is minimizing disturbance as much as possible, covering the soil as much as possible. A diet, again, cover crops and feeding the soil and getting organic matter into the soil. So diet and lifestyle is the basis of a healthy soil, just as it is for healthy humans.
And John and Sasha, this John and Sasha, you both agreed that although technology and terms may change, actually a lot of what is known, there's a lot of wisdom there that we should be discussing and revisiting.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, it can't, I mean, yeah, Harry did a brief history of British agriculture at the beginning. I mean, he went back to 1870, but I mean, we've kind of got into a bit of a muddle, but it is, I think, completely fascinating reading books that were written 100 years ago that are suggesting so many of the things we're talking about now. And wars happened, and artificial fertilizer happened, and various other things happened. And there was a sort of hiatus of the old wisdom got buried away, but it's coming out again now. Not least because so many of the things we've done, which we thought were clever, are actually completely disastrous for our soils and our farming businesses. But it's and as people are struggling now, and apart from these two guys down the end of the table who've got very the joy of regenerative farming for me is that we're again creating resilient businesses, and it's economically and ecologically resilient, and it's a win-win, very happy solution. But it's if you look at the old books, they talk about it all exactly the same thing. So it's nothing to be scared of. It's old wisdom that still works.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to leave it to James and Ed here to really finish off with those, because I think what you've been talking about is flexibility, long time scales, and how, James, your particular point was that we've got a lot going for us here in the Southwest. So can I leave the two of you to just finish this off, please? And you can applaud once they're finished.
I want to just talk about marketing and PR of farming a little bit, because regenerative farming or mixed farming is a really good news story for farming, and especially Devon farming. It's not just me, it's not just Ed, there's a load of farmers doing really cool stuff, and it's quite important for us to be proud of it and positive. How many articles do you pick up and say, due to modern farming techniques, we've got no wildlife and no farmland birds? It's a bit rubbish. We've got flocks of linnet, redwing, fieldfare, lapwing even when they want to arrive on the cold day. And it's not just my farm, like I say, there's loads of really great farmers, and we've just got to shout home about it and market ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, to not repeat what has already been said before, it is a case of diversity in all things, not only when it comes to what you feed your soil. To make yourself a resilient business and to be able to continue doing what we do, we cannot look at what has happened for the past 30 years has been driven by 40, 50 years, been driven by government and subsidy-driven sort of production. Is that actually we really do now have a key opportunity to look at not everyone can do everything that we do. Our system at home is designed around our system, our access to markets, our access to livestock, our labour capabilities. But I feel what all three of us have shown is that no matter which angle you approach this from, you can find a solution that not only will help your soil, will help your water quality, will help your biodiversity, and let's be honest, the key thing that we're all here for is that actually it will make us more profitable at the end of the day, because if we're not actually turning a profit, then none of us are here to continue the beneficial work next year.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to please thank our guests, and John's been a real stalwart in ad-libbing as we go along, but I've learned an awful lot from having this discussion over the last few weeks, and I hope that you've benefited as much as I have. So, thank you. If there's time for questions.
Yeah, questions.
Fire away.
Kevin Venner, farmer. Glyphosate, how do you feel about such a thing? Some think it's a kiss of death to microbes, others disagree.
I mean, I'll go first then. It is, in our system, it is still vital. A no-till system, unfortunately, its Achilles heel will always be the fact that there needs to be glyphosate in it. Parts of our rotation allow us to remove glyphosate from it. So with the correct previous cropping, the correct cover cropping, and the correct grazing, I can, at certain chunks of our rotation, remove the need for glyphosate completely. But there are certain parts of our rotation where if I want to grow a viable crop in a rotation that's also commercially viable, we have to use it. Now, there are mixed theories behind how damaging glyphosate is to the soil. Depends quite which angle you come at it from, but I think, like James, we use some mitigation factors, such as humic acid and molasses, short-chain sugar molecules mixed in the tank mix to hopefully help mitigate some of the potential bad sort of, downsides of glyphosate.
Yeah, in many aspects of farming, nothing's a win-win. It's all about a balance. And if we lost glyphosate or the use of glyphosate on our Devon slopes, I can guarantee we'd have more soil in the rivers and not in the field. So it's about managing it and using it where it's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I hate glyphosate. I used to think it was absolutely brilliant stuff until I started reading a bit about it. But it's but we use it, and it's hideously necessary. But I think I use an analogy which annoys a lot of people, so I like using it. It's I think, you know, if you regard your soil as a city, which in many ways it is, you know, you've got all the sort of roadways, pathways, building blocks, and a dose of glyphosate is a bit like coronavirus coming through. It kills a few people. It's unfortunate. A lot of people feel a bit ill. But life carries on. The trains keep running. The roads are still there. If you don't use glyphosate, you've got to cultivate, which is a bit like living in Mariupol and the Russians come through. You know, there's not a lot left afterwards. you know, and it kills many more people, and it's far more damaging and takes much longer to build up. So glyphosate, you know, it's not nice, but you know, as James says, I think it's not too bad. Well, it's bad, but I mean, we are. The lovely thing about this whole regen thing is things are developing rapidly, and the lovely thing about working with farmers in this field is they're incredibly collaborative, and they share ideas, and we've got to talk about the innovative farmers group and things, and events like this, and we can chat to each other and talk about, you know, different ways of doing things. And none of us have been doing that long, and every year we're learning new ways of doing things, and I think it won't be long before we can all work out a way of not having to use glyphosate. So until then, you know, let's be careful with it, and like Ed, you know, we add fumic acid and fulvic acid and stuff to it, and I think it definitely helps mitigate some of the less pleasant effects. But
what does the soil biologist think?
If I could just add quickly to that, I had a look into this because I was asked to by a company. So the FAO did a big study on the effect of agrochemicals on the soil microbial community, and I would need to check my notes, so I can't be sure that glyphosate was part of it. But in most cases, the microbes just eat it. They just eat this stuff, and even novel chemistry that nature's never seen before, microbes evolve to be able to eat it. The most damaging input from the microbial community point of view was copper. So I think people think copper is a, you know, because it's natural, it's probably a good, you know, won't do any harm, but actually it is quite damaging. So I think there's always trade-offs, and I think we'll make this point later as well, that we can't afford to, regenerative agriculture can't be about reduced yields unless something massive happens to our dietary demands on the food system. So we have to suffer or deal with trade-offs all the time, I think.
And someone just asked what I thought. The evidence is that glyphosate is broken down in soil, but it's much more effectively broken down in soil that has got a lot of oxygen in it. So that degradation pathway requires oxygen. So if you've got a good, structured, aerobic system, that glyphosate will break down much more effectively. Where it hangs around is in soil with poor structure that's got very little oxygen. That's when it accumulates in the soil, because the metabolic processes demand oxygen to break down glyphosate. So I think in many cases, and I can't emphasize this as much, that connectivity is so important for so many things in soil, including the breaking down of some of the chemicals that we have to use at the moment in soil. So that's what I think.
Any more questions?
Andrew Clark, National Farmers Union. Fascinating session. I'm tempted to think we've heard of regenerative agriculture this afternoon. I was wondering how many of those principles apply to the grassland farms we saw this morning, and how, because a lot of the discussion about regenerative farming has been driven by arable, or appears to be, perhaps from Gabe Brown and others. And the other bit, so I'd like any observations on that. And the other thing was, if you had the Secretary of State in here, just having heard about elms this last week, what would you like to say to her about how elms should work in the future for your type of farming system?
Come on. Now's the chance.
So I can't remember the first part of the question. I was so busy thinking. No, well, I just try and avoid politics where I possibly can. I mean, I think it's a complete. Your job's a nightmare, and I think the Secretary of State's job's a nightmare, and Elms is a nightmare. I just, it's a nightmare on Elms. Sorry, I won't go there. What was the first part?
It's about regenerative farming. Is it just an arable concept that hasn't applied to grass? Because it's, you know, first from
Well, I've been trying to give a lovely definition of what regenerative agriculture is, and the kind of best one I can come up with is any form of farming which improves the functionality of any of the systems on which you rely, which is a really kind of snappy, not at all snappy description, but because so much of it is about arable, and we talk about the 5 principles and keeping soil covered and things, for grassland farmers think, well, their soil's covered all the time, they've reintroduced animals, they've done all this stuff. But actually, you've still got to, there's various systems on which we rely, like the water cycle and the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle and going beyond that, the whole food cycle. You know, we're all farmers trying to sell into a completely dysfunctional food cycle, and it's up to us to try and, to be a part of making that work for us and for the population on the whole. And we're at risk of over-medicalising ourselves, as John was just saying about the whole. We're just terrible. We've got a national disease system, with apologies to the NHS, but it's all been taken over by pharmaceutical companies flogging medicines. That's all we can think about. Oh, we're ill, we need a medicine. We have to have a red tractor thing. They say, what's your herd health plan for your cattle? I say, well, my plan is to have healthy animals. No, but what medicine's using? Obviously, that's the whole point. I don't want to use any blinking medicines. It's like a. But the attitude is that health is all about pills and injections and stuff, and it isn't. It's a positive thing, and it's incredibly hard to pin down, and it's absolutely at the basis of everything that regenerative farming is all about, and it's far bigger than just our health or the the one plant health or whatever. And don't limit yourself to thinking about your farming, and it's the whole world you're going to be able to cure with your with whatever you grow.
So the Gobby Chair's got a couple of things he'd like to say. The first is a gentleman came up after our previous session who was asking questions about moving from permanent pastures into herbal lays and didn't want to plough it. And I suggested that you two might be worth talking to, because you may, is it possible to use your approaches to move from one to the other without ploughing the system up and replanting it? So that's one thing I'd like to ask. The other point, if the Secretary of State was in here, I would say a lot of the environmental legislation around farming is keeping our soils in a very poor state because it prevents the addition of organic matter to soils when it needs it, or when it's practically possible to add it. And that, I think, is a real concern of mine. And I think it's holding arable soils particularly in a doom loop, where you can't get organic matter onto the soil in the autumn, you can't do it in the spring, and there's lots of legislation that's preventing that. The systems are leaky and polluting because they have no organic matter in. And yet we're now prevented from getting organic matter in because the systems are leaky. And I think we're stuck here, and we need to break out of that cycle somehow. I'm not clever enough to know how to do it because I'm not practically minded, but I think there's an opportunity here for us to try and design how we might do that collectively. That's what I would say to the Secretary. It wasn't you that asked, but I can see you nodding, so you must have thought it was a good idea. But that's what I would say if they were here. So can you use a transition?
Yeah, I mean, I say from a grassland point of view, our grasslands, we use predominantly the same principles. We use diversity of grasses, so using herbal lays. It's not straight Westerwold ryegrasses like they used to be. They are now a diverse mixture, so we have diverse rooting, we have diverse flowering, so therefore we have an ecological benefit.
But how do you get from one to the other, Ed?
With, ironically, a lot of overgrazing. You overgraze your previous grass to the point where it can no longer cope, and you stop feeding it, and you get rid of all the excess nutrition in your soil to allow the establishment of a herbal lay that is self-sustaining and self-feeding and self-regulating. That's how we did it, because otherwise the first time we did it, all we did was grow ryegrass volunteers, which smothered everything out to an inch of its life.
So there is a role in pasture for your systems in pasture.
Yeah, and to the Secretary of State, I would ask that maybe to look beyond the confines of straight agriculture and to look at the bigger picture, God forbid, and the longer term picture. Christ, so longer than the next 5 minutes would be a novelty, to look at the linking of food, health, and education. And the three of those go hand in hand, yet no one ever seems to put them together. That a population that understands the health benefits, that is eating healthy food produced in a sustainable, dodgy word sometimes, or regenerative way, leads to lowering admissions to hospitals for things like type 2 diabetes. You have children who can concentrate better in school because they are fed a better diet. Therefore, they theoretically come out with better grades and can have higher earning jobs. The Exchequer is really happy then, there's more tax. But unfortunately, that takes 30 years to come to fruition, and therefore no one actually ever does it. Not that I'm a pessimist.
Who's got the microphone?
Any more questions?
There's a gentleman at the back there. Oh, there's loads. Well, two.
Thank you very much. In this world we're living in at the moment, antibiotics are a bit of a concern when it gets to the press. I'm just wondering, is herbal lays a good way of keeping animals up together healthy? Plus, do anybody use homeopathic medicine to enhance animal welfare? Because obviously they're going to be the organic matter that goes back into the ground, aren't they?
So from our perspective, we very much have lowered our use of antibiotics. Throughout our system, we have far less intensive animal rearing system than we used to, which removes a lot of stress, which caused a lot of the issues that needed antibiotics. From a worming point of view, thanks to the fact that most of our sheep spend a lot of their lives on totally clean ground, they will spend 10 days in a field once a year, done. There is no worm burden that they can pick up. So therefore, actually, our use of wormers has dropped drastically, which actually, when they are on grassland, is an added benefit to a grassland soil ecosystem because, and I can never remember the name of the chemical in wormers, but it has a very toxic effect to...
Ivermectin?
That's the one. Has a very toxic effect. And then when they are on grass, they're on herbal lays. And chicory, the tannins in the likes of chicory, have a homeopathic effect of worming. So we actually now use straight chicory lays as almost a worming ground. They will spend 4 days eating nothing but chicory, which effectively flushes their systems through and has allowed a massive reduction in the use of artificial wormers.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I know with our cat. I mean, I have to practically explain who I am when I ring the vet because it's not a, it's not. We kind of don't want them. I mean, it's very handy when things go wrong, but on a sort of regular basis shouldn't be necessary. We stopped using wormers and haven't had a problem. But it's fascinating watching cows. We're moving them every day, sometimes twice a day, and each animal knows exactly what it wants. They self-medicate. They're terribly clever, and it's a job if you're self-medicating on a field of perennial ryegrass because everything tastes the same. But your herbal lays, some go for the chicory, some go for the patch of nettles, some will even eat thistles. Some go straight to the hedge and eat. They know what they want, and the same animal the next day will do something completely different. Then talk about going back to the old wisdom. It's also going back to the wisdom of the cows, giving them an opportunity to self-medicate and look after themselves. It really happens. I thought it was kind of hippie rubbish, when I heard this, but actually observing what nature does. Completely fascinating. Nature just is so interesting. And we can learn so much, it's observation, so interesting.
I've got one more quick question.
This is a question for Ed, but and James as well a bit. But what's the latest you put lambs into, like, say, a crop of winter wheat?
Well, it depends how bold you feel. Theoretically, you can graze a crop of wheat until the moment its ear emerges, quite happily, and it will come back to life quite happily. You may combine it in October. It will survive. Normally, our regime with wheat, we will finish grazing wheat. We aim for growth stage 31, so we aim for middle to end of March, depending on what the weather we have is at home. we can be under quite a lot of snow in March on top of our little perch. Oats we can push to the middle of April. Oats are very happy. Oats, rye, triticale, spelt, all the slightly less inbred varieties of cereals will happily take grazing a lot later and a lot harder. But they thrive off it. Oats is the best thing for oats. I can grow the best crops of oats we've ever grown is where I have trashed them to death with sheep because I didn't care about them and we use them as a holding ground, and it was the best crop of oats I've ever grown. So yeah, middle of March, sort of as a vague cut-off date with sheep on cereals.
I'm getting a clock waved in my face. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like you to thank the panel again, please.